No one in Ngoma village spoke about the midwife after sunset. Not openly, not even in whispers that the wind might carry. By day, Mama Ife was a healer, a deliverer of children, a woman whose hands were steady, whose voice soothed the sharp cries of laboring mothers. By night, she became something else. Something older than the village itself. Something no villager dared name. The sun had sunk behind the hills when Amina's cries reached the ears of the few villagers still moving between huts. She was young, trembling, clutching her swollen belly as she was guided along the twisted path that led to Mama Ife's hut. The ground was dry, cracked, and littered with fallen leaves that cracked sharply under their feet. Shadows from the gnarled fig trees stretched across the dirt like skeletal fingers, reaching, twisting, pressing against them as if trying to stop their progress. No one spoke. Their eyes avoided hers. A hush lay over the village, heavy and oppressive, like a blanket dipped in smoke. Mothers who had once smiled at Mama Ife during the day now crossed themselves quietly, muttering prayers. The air smelled of earth, of dry leaves, of something metallic that made the villagers swallow hard. Amina's breaths came in short, sharp bursts. Her mother had been beside her, guiding her, but the old woman stepped back now, trembling, unwilling to stay. "Go on," she whispered. "You must see her before the night takes hold." The hut was barely more than a cluster of sticks and mud, its roof patched with dried palm leaves. Smoke already twisted from the small iron pots outside, the scent of herbs thick and pungent. Inside, the fire cast shadows that leaped across the walls, shadows that seemed to twist and stretch, elongating and shrinking as if alive. Mama Ife sat cross-legged on the woven mat, her back straight, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight in tiny, fathomless pools. When she saw Amina, her lips curved into a soft, welcoming smile. "Rest, child," she said, her voice gentle, warm, reassuring. "Your baby will see the world." Amina wanted to believe her. She wanted to feel the comfort that the midwife's words promised. But her heart stuttered in her chest as a chill ran down her spine, prickling her skin like invisible fingers. Mama Ife muttered something under her breath, so soft that only the fire seemed to hear. "Not all who are born are meant for life." The words barely brushed the air before they were swallowed by the flickering shadows. Amina was guided inside. The hut smelled of burnt sage, iron, earth, and something else. A faint sweetness, cloying, almost like the scent of decayed flowers. Mama Ife's hands hovered over the expectant mother's belly, moving with precise, ritualistic motions. She pressed, she measured, she whispered incantations older than the village itself, words that stirred the air and made it pulse against Amina's skin. "You are strong," Mama Ife murmured. "But even strength bends under what must come." Outside, the wind began to howl. The fig trees rattled in protest, their branches scratching against the hut as if seeking entry. A shadow slid across the wall, impossible in its movement, bending backwards in ways that no human body could. The villagers outside dared not look directly, their eyes fixed on the ground, their hearts hammering, their ears straining for any hint of normalcy. And then they heard it. Second cry. Faint. A wail that did not belong to Amina. A sound that seemed to rise from beneath the soil itself. The villagers froze. Some stepped back, clutching their hearts. Others whispered prayers, crossing themselves with shaking hands. But they could not leave. Curiosity, or perhaps dread, rooted them to the spot. Inside, Mama Ife's eyes were calm, unfathomable. She lifted the baby with reverent care. Its skin was pale, almost translucent in the firelight. Its chest did not rise. Its lips did not move. And yet there was a faint pulse, not of this world, that lingered, faint and rhythmic, beneath her hands. "It belongs to another place," Mama Aoife whispered, her voice barely more than a sigh. Before anyone could ask what she meant, she pressed her lips to the child's brow and murmured words that slipped into the smoke, curling around the beams of the hut and out into the night. "Sleep well, little one. The journey begins." The wind carried her whisper across the village, so faint that it seemed a trick of imagination. Yet the villagers heard it, unmistakable. And in that moment a chill ran down every spine. Another soul had been delivered, one not meant for life, and the veil between the living and the departed had thinned. Outside the night deepened. Shadows moved between huts, figures bending unnaturally, walking backward along narrow paths. They whispered names of children who had vanished years ago, their voices layered over the cries of the wind. No one dared speak. No one dared move. Smoke from Mama Aoife's hut spiraled upward in thick green-tinted clouds. Faces appeared within it, small, crying, reaching out. Some villagers swore they saw their lost children in the shapes, mouths moving as if begging to be taken home. The fire inside the hut glowed brighter than fire should, yet it gave off no warmth. It was a light that existed to reveal, not to comfort. Amina's cries had stilled. Her body shook, exhausted, fearful, as she watched Mama Aoife cradle the child. When the midwife finally laid the baby into Amina's arms, a silence fell. The child's eyes reflected something unnatural, tiny faces she recognized, children who had vanished without trace over the years. Their expressions flickered across the baby's irises, smiling, crying, pleading, lost. Amina's mother gasped, covering her mouth, tears running down her cheeks. How is this possible?" she whispered, voice breaking. Mama Aoife's lips curved in a sad, knowing smile. "Not all children are gone. Some wait." Before anyone could respond, the midwife stood. Her movements were fluid, almost otherworldly. She walked to the doorway, and in one graceful step, she disappeared into the darkness. Only a faint glimmer of green light lingered where she had stood. The villagers blinked, hearts hammering, afraid to speak lest the silence shatter in something worse than noise. Amina cradled the baby, warmth radiating from its small body despite the eerie eyes. She wanted to hold it close, to feel the comfort of new life, but the faces within the infant's gaze made her recoil, a shiver crawling down her spine. No one dared approach the hut. No one dared knock. The villagers turned away, murmuring in hushed tones. Mothers clutched their children tightly. Fathers glanced over their shoulders, fear rooting them to the spot. Stories would be told in whispers for generations, that the midwife did not merely deliver babies, but delivered souls, and sometimes one could glimpse the living and the lost mingling in her care. By dawn, Ngoma village was quiet. The night had retreated, leaving behind a haze that smelled faintly of iron and ash. Amina awoke, holding her child. It slept peacefully in her arms, innocent in appearance but heavy with secrets. The villagers watched from afar. Even in the morning light, the baby's eyes glimmered with something they could not name, faces of children lost long ago flickering within. And Mama Aoife vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers, smoke, and the lingering sense that some things were never meant to be understood. No one spoke of the night openly, and those who did, well, the stories always ended the same way, with a warning. If you ever see the midwife at night, do not approach, and never ask whose soul she carries. The village returned to its routines, but the air remained thick, heavy with secrets. Shadows lengthened differently after that night, and children sometimes claimed to see figures bending strangely between the trees, whispering names no one else dared speak. And in the quiet corners of huts, The faintest trace of green smoke lingered. Like a reminder, like a promise, like a warning. Another soul had been delivered, and the midwife would come again. The days after that night were quiet on the surface, but the village of Ngoma had shifted. The sun rose and set, but it seemed dimmer, like it had lost a part of its warmth. The wind carried hushed whispers that no one could trace. Even in the brightest hours, the villagers felt eyes on them that weren't human. Amina noticed it first. Her child slept fitfully, stirring in ways that made her skin crawl. At night, the baby's small eyes would open, reflecting the firelight in unnatural glimmers, and sometimes, Amina swore she saw fleeting faces within them. Faces of children she remembered only from stories of those who had disappeared long ago. At first, she dismissed it as exhaustion. But then came the whispers. "Mama!" Amina froze. The voice was faint, trembling, familiar, yet not her child's. She held her breath, listening. The hut's shadows deepened as the fire flickered, stretching long, jagged fingers across the walls. The whispers came again, closer this time, rising and falling with the wind. One night, unable to bear it, she followed the sound. She slipped out of the hut, clutching a lantern. The forest at the edge of the village loomed like a black wall. The trees swayed, casting twisted shapes that crawled along the ground. Amina's heart pounded as her feet crunched over dry leaves. Somewhere between the branches, the voices grew stronger, clearer, chanting names she recognized but could not call hers. There, in a clearing lit by the silver light of the moon, she saw them, children. Figures she knew had been gone for years, now moving in slow, graceful patterns across the grass. Their eyes glowed faintly, green like the firelight in Mama Aoife's hut. They moved in eerie harmony, their laughter hollow, their whispers overlapping in a language that twisted her stomach. And at the center, like a dark sun in the middle of a storm, stood Mama Aoife. Her hands lifted, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in white cloth. She moved with ritualistic precision, her lips murmuring words that seemed older than the forest itself. "Another soul to guide," she whispered, and the wind carried her words to Amina's ears as if spoken directly into her mind. Amina could not look away. Her legs were rooted to the ground, her lantern shaking in her grip. The children's faces turned toward her briefly, their smiles slow and knowing, as if they had been expecting her all along. The horror of understanding began to press against her chest. Her child was part of this. Somehow, her newborn was linked to those who had disappeared. Every heartbeat, every restless twitch, every gaze that lingered too long, it was all connected. Days passed, and the village grew quieter. Mothers no longer called their children to play in the fields. Even the dogs barked less, their cries short and uncertain. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, moving in ways that defied reason. And every night the lullaby, a song older than Ngoma itself, echoed softly in the distance, never fully heard but always felt, wrapping itself around the village like smoke. Amina approached Baba Sefiu, the oldest man in the village, who had once been a teacher of herbs and old songs. His eyes were pale, clouded with memories no living soul should carry. "The midwife," he said quietly, "does not only deliver children. She carries souls that the earth has not yet claimed." He paused, trembling. "Every child that disappears, every infant that never cries belongs to her. She walks between the worlds." The words chilled Amina to her core. She remembered the faces in her child's eyes, the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, the shadows that lingered at the corners of her vision. Her own baby was not entirely her own. She could not sleep that night. She watched as the shadows in the hut lengthened and thickened, twisting and curling toward her child's crib. She touched her baby's hand, It was warm and soft, yet the warmth carried a weight, as if something ancient pressed against it. The baby's eyes opened, reflecting not just the flicker of the firelight, but shapes she could not name. Faces, crying, reaching, waiting. Finally, she resolved to follow the midwife. One night, when the moon hung high and the village lay silent, she crept out, hiding behind trees, her breath caught in her chest. Mama Aoife moved through the village like a shadow of the wind itself, each step leaving faint imprints glowing a soft green. With every exhalation, the whispers of the dead rose in the air. The midwife paused at the graveyard. She knelt before a fresh mound of earth, lifting her bundle high. The ground seemed to shiver beneath her. Shadows twisted from the soil, rising slowly, taking the shapes of lost children, reaching, stretching, calling in voices that were hers and not hers at once. "This one is ready," Mama Aoife said, her voice calm, almost tender. A scream tore from Amina's lips, but the wind swallowed it before it could reach the village. She watched in silent horror as Mama Aoife placed the bundle into the earth, murmuring words that sounded like a lullaby and a curse at once. The shadows wrapped the infant in green smoke, pulling it beneath the soil, and then nothing. By morning, Amina returned to her hut. Her child lay asleep in the crib, breathing gently, perfectly ordinary, or so it seemed. No trace of the night's events remained. Yet she felt it deep in her chest. Her baby's heartbeat was not entirely its own. A part of something else stirred within, ancient and unseen. Days turned to weeks. Shadows lingered longer in her home. The whispers came and went, fading when she tried to tell others, growing louder when she tried to ignore them. The villagers avoided her house. Children refused to play near it. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass by. And sometimes when she closed her eyes, she heard it. The lullaby older than the village itself, humming softly, just beyond the threshold of sleep. It promised nothing, yet threatened everything. Amina realized then the terrible truth. Some deliveries were blessings, some were curses, and some souls never returned. Months passed. The village of Ngoma tried to return to normal, but Amina could not forget. Every night, the lullaby drifted faintly from the forest, wrapping her hut in a cold, silent terror. Her child slept fitfully, eyes flickering with faces of the lost. Amina could no longer deny the truth. Mama Aoife's curse was not over. The next New Year's Eve, she made her choice. She would escape. Cradling her child, she stepped into the darkness, leaving her hut behind. The forest awaited, its branches clawing at her arms, twisting unnaturally to block the path. Each step seemed to circle her back, the river she aimed for always just out of reach. The ground itself seemed alive, shifting beneath her feet, roots tangling as if to pull her down. "There is nowhere to run," the wind whispered, weaving through the trees like a living thing. Amina shivered, clutching the child closer. The baby's small hand twitched, not in rest, but as though responding to the unseen chorus of souls around them. Then she saw her. Mama Aoife stood in the doorway of her own hut, yet not truly there, as though she had emerged from the shadows themselves. She was neither young nor old, but timeless. Her eyes glowed faint green, reflecting the light of hundreds of unseen souls. Around her, the mist curled like fingers, thickening the air. "You cannot hide what belongs to the other side," she said softly, voice both gentle and terrible. Amina fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Take me instead. Take my life. Please, I beg you, just leave my child." Mama Aoife's lips curved in a faint, sorrowful smile. She shook her head. "You brought her into the world. She must join the others." The child cried, but not like a living baby. It was a chorus of the souls Mama Aoife had carried over decades, screaming, weeping, calling out names Amina recognized but had long thought lost. The air thrummed with their presence, the forest itself vibrating in response. Amina scrambled to her feet, running toward the door, hoping to pry open some path to freedom. Shadows rose from the earth, twisting toward her like dark vines. The wind shrieked in her ears, carrying whispers of children calling her name, crying for release. Mama Aoife extended her hands. The green light that radiated from her eyes spilled over the clearing. The shadows lunged forward, forming ghostly hands that wrapped around the child. Amina tried to pull the infant free, her fingers clutching at something that was not entirely there. "It's too late," Mama Aoife said, voice echoing through the trees, layered with hundreds of others, faint and familiar. Amina's scream tore through the night, but the wind swallowed it, scattering it into silence. She felt the child slip from her grasp, lifted into Mama Aoife's arms, writhing in a chorus of cries. The shadows from the earth coiled, lifting the baby higher, spiraling it into the mist like smoke drawn upward by an unseen fire. A final flash of green light illuminated the forest, and then it was gone. Amina fell to her knees, panting, her arms empty, the forest silent except for the faintest hum of the lullaby, echoing in her mind. By sunrise, the villagers found her hut empty. No trace of struggle, no footprints beyond the doorway, only the small crib rocking slightly in the morning light. Her child slept quietly inside, its chest rising and falling with perfect rhythm, but its eyes reflected the faces of countless souls Mama Aoife had delivered across decades, faces frozen in light and shadow. The village whispered for years after that day. Mothers spoke in low tones, telling their children, "No one leaves the midwife's house once the soul is chosen. And some deliveries are never meant for life." Mama Aoife herself vanished into the morning mist that day, carrying a bundle of silent, glowing infants. The villagers knew what it meant. Another soul had been delivered. Another child had crossed into the world beyond. And the lullaby, it never ended. On moonless nights, the wind carried its faint notes through the village, promising nothing, yet warning everything. If you ever hear the lullaby of the midwife, do not follow it. Subscribe for more haunting and terrifying tales.